You laughed at something today. Maybe it was a message from a friend, something stupid on your phone, or a dog doing something ridiculous on the street. You didn't plan it. It just happened. And for a split second, everything else stopped mattering. Now here's the thing nobody ever asks. Did people do that 50,000 years ago? We know everything about ancient humans. What they ate, how they hunted, what their teeth looked like. We've mapped their migrations across continents and decoded their DNA from a finger bone found in a cave. But we almost never ask whether they were happy. And the reason we don't ask is because we've already assumed the answer. We assume it was brutal, nasty, short, and hard. We assume happiness is something humans had to earn across millennia, a luxury of modern life. We assumed wrong. Let's start with the assumption. The story we tell about ancient life goes like this. They woke up terrified, spent the day trying not to get eaten, watched their children die, and collapsed into a dreamless sleep before doing it all again. Happiness wasn't really on the table. Survival was the whole game. This story feels true, it makes logical sense, and it is almost entirely backwards. Here's what we actually know. Hunter-gatherer societies, the closest living window we have to how humans lived for 95% of our existence. Work on average, between 3 and 5 hours a day to meet all their needs. Not 8, not 10, 3 to 5. The anthropologist Marshall Salins looked at this data in the 1960s and called hunter-gatherers the original affluent society. They had, by his measure, more leisure time than almost anyone alive today. The food was there, the community was small, the needs were real but they were met. This doesn't mean life was easy. It wasn't. Injury was common. Childbirth was dangerous. A bad season could hurt everyone. But hardship and unhappiness are not the same thing. We know this from our own lives. Some of the hardest periods people describe are also the ones they remember as the most alive. The assumption that suffering cancels out joy is a modern one, and it says more about us than it does about them. Here's the part that should settle the question but somehow never does. Happiness isn't a cultural invention, it's biology. The same neurological hardware that lights up when you laugh at something stupid on your phone, dopamine, serotonin, oxytocin, endorphins. That system is ancient, older than language, older than fire. It exists in nearly identical form in rats, in dolphins, in birds. Evolution doesn't build expensive machinery and then leave it sitting idle. These systems exist because they serve a purpose, and they were running in full in every human who ever lived. In 2009, a team led by psychologist Jonathan Gottschall at Washington and Jefferson College analyzed folklore and oral tradition from cultures across the world, societies with no contact with each other, separated by oceans and centuries. What they found was this. The emotional content of the stories was almost identical everywhere. Love, jealousy, grief, triumph, humor, pride. The inner lives of humans, regardless of when or where they lived, were not simpler versions of ours. They were the same. Oxytocin, the chemical your brain releases when you feel warmth toward another person, when you hold someone you love, when a group of people laugh together. It doesn't require a comfortable life to activate. It requires connection, and ancient humans had connection in a way most of us, if we're honest, do not. Their social groups were small, 30 to 50 people typically. Everyone knew everyone. You were never invisible. You were never alone in a crowd. There was no such thing as strangers ignoring you in an elevator. The isolation that quietly corrodes modern happiness was structurally impossible in the environment humans evolved in. But there's one source of happiness from the ancient world that nobody talks about, and it might be the most powerful one of all. Music. Not music like you know it. Not headphones on the subway. Not a playlist you half listen to while you make dinner. Something completely different. Something older and stranger and more powerful than anything you've experienced in a concert hall. Every human culture ever studied, without a single exception, makes music together. Not performs it, makes it. Communally. Archaeologists have found bone flutes in caves in Slovenia and Germany dating back 40,000 years. Percussion instruments older than that. The oldest art we've ever found and the oldest musical instruments appear at almost exactly the same moment in the human record. We became symbolic creatures and musical creatures simultaneously. That's not a coincidence. But here's what those flutes don't tell you. The real music of the ancient world wasn't an instrument. It was the human voice, singing together in groups around fire for hours. And what singing together does to a human body is something we're only now beginning to fully measure. In 2015, a team of researchers at the University of Oxford, led by psychologist Robin Dunbar, the same Robin Dunbar famous for calculating the cognitive limit of human social groups, published a study in the journal Evolution and Human Behavior. They compared people who sang together in choirs against people who socialized together in other ways. The singers showed dramatically faster bonding, not slightly faster, dramatically. The oxytocin release, the pain threshold tenfold increase. The sense of being connected to something larger than yourself, it happened in singing groups within a single session, in a way it took weeks to develop otherwise. Dunbar's conclusion was striking. Synchronized physical activity, especially singing, is one of the most efficient bonding mechanisms the human brain has. It bypasses the slow drip of getting to know someone and floods the system all at once. Ancient humans did this every night, not occasionally, not on special occasions. Every single night around fire they sang, they danced, they moved in synchrony. The Yuhonzi Bushmen that Polly Wiesner studied, the same group from the daytime versus nighttime conversation research, described their nightly fire circles as the emotional centre of life. Not a nice addition to life, the centre of it. We've built cathedrals and stadiums and concert venues trying to recreate that feeling. We pay hundreds of dollars for a ticket to stand in a crowd and feel it for 2 hours. They had it for free every night for 300,000 years. And then there's the dancing. Synchronized movement between bodies releases endorphins in a way that solo movement simply doesn't. A run will make you feel good. Dancing with other people will make you feel something closer to euphoria. Evolutionary psychologists now believe this is why dancing exists at all. Not as entertainment, not as courtship display, though it serves both, but as a biochemical bonding mechanism that kept small groups emotionally coherent under pressure. Ancient humans weren't stumbling into joy accidentally. Their entire social structure was, without knowing it, an extraordinarily efficient happiness machine. So here's the question that should make you slightly uncomfortable. If ancient humans had deep community, daily music, meaningful work, genuine leisure, and the same neurological capacity for joy that you have, why do we assume they were miserable? And more importantly, if we have longer lives, safer bodies, more food than we could ever eat, and access to every piece of music ever recorded, why are rates of loneliness, anxiety, and depression higher now than at any point in recorded history? The World Health Organization estimates that depression is now one of the leading causes of disability worldwide. Loneliness has been declared a public health crisis in multiple countries. We are, by every material measure, the most comfortable humans who have ever lived, and we are struggling in ways that would have been structurally impossible for our ancestors. The ancient world had real suffering. Don't romanticize it. Infant mortality was devastating. Injuries that a 10-minute hospital visit would fix today were death sentences then. The vulnerability was constant and it was real, but vulnerability and connection lived side by side. In fact, the vulnerability may have deepened the connection. When your survival depends on the 30 people around you, those 30 people become everything. We solved the survival problem, and in doing so, we quietly, accidentally, dismantled the happiness machine. We just didn't notice until it was already gone. Here's something worth sitting with for a moment. We have spent centuries studying ancient humans with extraordinary dedication. We've analysed the isotopes in their bones to figure out what they ate for breakfast. We've reconstructed their faces from skull fragments. We've sequenced DNA from a 40,000-year-old tooth and traced entire population movements across continents. We know their parasites. We know their injuries. We know how they held a spear. And yet the question of whether they were happy, whether they laughed, whether they felt wonder, whether they went to sleep at night feeling something like contentment, that question was barely considered serious science until about 15 years ago. Think about what that silence reveals. It reveals what we assumed happiness required: a salary, a roof with insulation, a phone, a healthcare system. We looked at people who had none of those things, and we simply assumed the inner life must have been dim, thin, a pale version of ours, but the evidence keeps pointing in the opposite direction. The inner life wasn't thin, it was loud and warm and full. We just couldn't see it because we were looking for the wrong things. So go back to that laugh you had today. You didn't manufacture it. You didn't earn it. It just arrived. A small, involuntary burst of something good. And what produced it wasn't your salary or your apartment or anything you've worked for. It was a moment of connection. Something ridiculous, shared, human. That laugh is 300,000 years old. The circuitry behind it was already ancient when the first flute was carved from a vulture bone in a cave in Germany. Every person who ever lived on this planet had access to exactly what you felt in that moment. We are not the first humans to be happy. We are not the peak of it either. We are somewhere in the middle of a very long story about what it means to be alive and feel something about it. The ancient humans didn't need us to feel joy, but somewhere along the way, we started to need things they never did. Whether that trade was worth it is a question only you can answer, and you'll probably think about it the next time something makes you laugh.